So good morning. Welcome to Fashion Forward ATL. We have a special episode here. Usually we're talking fashion, but today I wanted to talk a little real estate. We have Jay Diaz here in the Atlanta area, and she is going to give us her wealth of knowledge on the industry and possibly could help with different information on buying your first home. She's also a realtor, so she can also help you with looking for your home and things like that. So with no further ado, I'll let her introduce herself and then I'll go from there.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Jay Diaz, and I'm with Atlantic Real Estate Brokers. So we serve all of Metro Atlanta area. A little bit about myself. I am originally from Boston, lived in Florida forever, and now I'm a fellow Georgia Peach.
Okay.
I love Atlanta. I love the city. I love my community. Been here for about 3 to 4 years now, and it's great. So how did I get started in real estate? That's a great question. I actually went to the University of South Florida and got a bachelor's degree in public health. And so
Okay.
the original plan was to do administration in the hospital.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, move on to a master's or something in administration. But things didn't pan out that way. I actually ended up being friends with a broker who opened up a brokerage company here in Atlanta, and I decided to take that route and try it. It's definitely more of a freelancing kind of thing. You're not on a clock in, clock out type of thing, and that really called my attention. And who doesn't love beautiful houses, you know? So yeah.
Okay, perfect. So as far as so you got in with a broker, real estate. Talk to me a little bit about. I know there's a process, right, to become a real estate agent. You take the test
That's
and
right.
things like that. But during that whole process, what was your passion? Like, what would you say was your passion about getting into the industry?
Well, that's a multifaceted question for sure. Like I said, one of the main reasons was just the flexibility. As a real estate agent in the state of Georgia, we're not considered employees. We're technically considered independent contractors, which, for me, it allowed me the freedom. It's kind of like being your own boss in a way, because essentially you do have a business. So even though we work under a brokerage, you yourself are your own entity. And that for me really attracted me because I like the idea of freedom and flexibility and being able to be creative with that. And on the other side, I really like helping my community as far as knowledge, education, applied knowledge, and just giving them the tools that they need. I particularly, people, the younger generation or like the 90s babies, that we're just starting to touch into that world of, purchasing our first home and exploring what that adulting
Oh,
side of things looks like. Right. So for me, that it was definitely a win-win on that side as well.
absolutely. So it's funny that you say that. So I'm 30, and I feel like most of the conversations with my friends and around me and is either purchasing their first home because a lot of times people want to wait and things like that till they get their dream home and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I went the other route. Like as soon as I could make enough to rent out an apartment, I bought a condo and then went from there. Because I didn't look at everything as this is my permanent home and things like that. So
Right.
one of the most common misconceptions of people is when you buy a home, you have to live in it for the extent of the mortgage and things like that. But people don't
Right.
really realize you can, start small, get a one bedroom, sell it, then you can, take that money and get, another property and things like that. But what I wanted to get started, because you hit on it a little bit about, just buying your first home. So I want to kind of take everyone through the process of purchasing your first home, how it works, and things like that. So let's say, you know, my name is Sam. I'm heavy on Zillow, right? Because I'm used to technology, and I look around. Why do I need a realtor to get my process started?
Okay, that is a phenomenal question, Sam. So that is actually one of the, like you said, the misconception. That's one of those home buying myths that we hear a lot, particularly on the buyer side. So, I mean, there's the reason why you need an agent is because, like anything, I mean, buying a home, whether it's permanent, long term, you're going to be your primary residence, or like in your case, renting out for profit as an investment property, regardless, it's one of the biggest purchases that we will ever make in our lifetime. So there's a lot of laws and policies and just a lot of logistics that as a normal consumer you may or may not be aware of. And just to save yourself hassle, trouble, time, even legal issues, that sometimes you want a professional who's prepared, someone who has taken the time to go to the schooling, who's been licensed, who's had experience in these different scenarios, and who can really give you some of the tools that you may need. So like you said, Zillow is an amazing company. And they have an amazing app where you can totally get real time, views on houses and even virtual tours now with everything that's going on. And that's amazing. Yeah. But at the same time, you're going to want someone who's been in the field doing this, someone who cares about your needs and can really provide you the knowledge that you will need, to proceed in the transaction.
Absolutely. So let's say I want to get started. I hire you as a realtor. Is it going to cost me any money to hire you as a realtor initially?
Well, if you, as a home buyer, as the buyer in the state of Georgia, no. Essentially, we're working with you for free. We don't charge you for our services until we hit the closing table, and that's when we're paid. And actually, like in the state of Georgia, the seller's actually the ones that are responsible for paying that commission out. So as a buyer, you're not losing anything by hiring an agent that you would trust to help you out throughout the transaction.
Absolutely. And, that's one of the hard facts that I had to realize because, real estate agents, all the work is done on the front end for you,
Yes.
no cost to you and things like that. So your process, let's say, I am freshly new, and I'm going to give like a starting base salary of what, people starting off in the workforce. The most I've heard is I can't do this because I don't make enough money to own a house, but yet, people rent homes and they rent condos and things like that for $1,200 to $1,800 a month. And they're at the point where they're saying, I don't make enough money. So let's say, an entry level salary into the workforce. I'm a recruiter. So I would say about 35 to 40,000, right? Let's say I have 35 to $40,000 a year that I make. I'm currently renting an apartment that's $1,100 a month, and I've been doing that, because that's the route people usually go, right? When you're getting your
Yeah.
place, it's never, my first place is going to be my home. Is always let me
Right.
rent out my first apartment, and usually if you're young and you want to experience life in the city or you want to live close to the city and things like that, what's the process? Given that I have my yearly salary, what do I do next? What's the process of like, hey, I want to live somewhere. How do they come to you with the information ready to go? And where do you take that information? Like, do they give you like a certain zip code to look at, or what's your initial intake call look like?
Well, this is a multifaceted question as well. So there's a few components that go into that.
Okay.
So you said, your entry level salary, so much a year, you're renting this much in this type of a city, you want to be in this type of zip code, right? These are all very important things to take into account as your agent.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, what I always tell my clients, anyone who approaches me after we have the initial conversation, is okay, our first step is to talk to a lender. So this would be a local mortgage company, someone who can really help you get the finance side in order. So as a real estate agent, I will be, we'll be driving around town, we'll be house shopping, I'll be negotiating on your behalf. But as far as actually securing the financing or the mortgage loan, you will need a lender that can help you, secure that. So I would connect you to a lender. I work with multiple lenders in the local area. I would connect you guys. You could actually, I always recommend my clients shop around. So so with mortgages, it is a hard inquiry on your credit at first when you first start the process, but they do allow you a window, like a grace period window, where you're able to shop around. I think minimum 30 days. Some do 60, some do 90, but for the most part, on average, it's 30 days, and you have a whole month where you can talk to different lenders and say, hey, what programs do you have available? Do you do any help with closing costs if need be? What are your, loan requirements, down payments, and things like that? There's those different factors. Oh, good one. What's your interest rates like? Things like that, and see who could get you what you need and who can help you, what's going to be best for you and your circumstance. Once you get the loan and you get pre-approved for the loan, that's when we revisit the table and say, okay, what zip codes are you looking for, and kind of work around that
area. Yeah, and then so let's say I'm new to this, right? I don't even know what a lender is. And like you mentioned earlier, you provide a lender, right? As far as shopping around for a lender, is that something that as a real estate agent, you give advice on, or specifically, which lender to send people to?
Well, a lot of different brokerages, they have preferred lenders that they work with, that we partner with, just because, the rapport is there. We've worked with them many times. We know how we work. We just know each other. That's how it is in the industry. But I always say, shop around. Always. That's why I won't just give you one. I'll give you 2 or 3, because I want this to be your decision. Okay. But as far as advice with lenders, a lot of people, especially people that are new to the home buying process, their first instinct is to go to their bank. Oh, I've been with Bank of America for 20 years. And I'm not speaking bad about Bank of America, but as your agent, I always say a tip is to try to go to smaller banks, credit unions, for the most part, because credit unions, as you may or may not know, compared to a larger, corporate financial institution, they're more on the consumer side in a way. Yeah. So they'll probably be a little bit more flexible. They want your business. So they're not as big. So they're going to probably, want to work with you more, offer you larger incentives. And so that's something that I always definitely recommend.
Yeah, and these are also things that you can do completely online. Like, I think, the home buying process has become so different as we moved into, technology resources and things like that. So it's not more so you're not going to take meetings with these different banks, sit downs and things like that. These are all numbers based. So these are things that you physically and things that you see online. So just a common question. People and I know you're not a lender, just to preface this question, as far as lowest amount of credit score you can have that you've seen approved for a loan, because the biggest thing is, my credit is not good enough yet. This person is approved for a car, which is also a big purchase, and they've got some credit card bills, but they've gotten approved for different credit cards and things like that. What would you say, like, if someone comes to you and say, I don't think my credit score is high enough to get approved for a home? Like, what would you say? Because normally I always think too, it's more so the price of the home versus the credit score. It's not necessarily, is sometimes you might be looking for 350 and you're like, well, my credit score is not good enough to get 350. And that very well might be the case, but there's condos and townhomes that are like 150 and below that, it's a great starting point and things like that. Instead of you spending that next 2 years renting, and literally you could be using that money to build equity. So what would you say to someone who's like, I don't think my credit score is good enough to buy a home?
Okay. Well, like you said, how someone is trying to look for the 350 range, but their credit is not where it needs to be. Credit is actually just one of the areas that lenders look at when they're composing your pre-approval amount. there's actually a few things that go into that. And again, I'm not a lender, so specifics vary from lender to lender, but something such as income, how much are you bringing in, not just from your job. Maybe you have a side hustle, maybe you have a company, maybe you get some type of, stipend or something, whatever the situation may be, they take that into consideration, and they look at what's called your DTI, which is your debt to income ratio. So that also helps determine, your eligibility or your approval chances of securing a loan, depending on, the bracket that you're looking at. So it's not just credit, but specifically when we're talking about credit, if someone was to come to me and have that conversation with me and say, hey, I don't think my credit is good enough, I try not to dive too deep into, my client's personal finances, because again, that's your business. But if we have that relationship where we're just talking openly, I just say, well, here, for example, FHA loans, which is the Federal Housing Administration loan, which is very popular. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yep.
It's typically used for first-time home buyers or those who have less than perfect credit score, which we're talking about. That's a minimum of 580. It depends on the lender. It depends on the bank that you're going to, because sometimes even though FHA is a minimum 580 on the standard level, they might have 600 minimum, like they don't feel like working with anybody under that. So it depends. But that's something that you could qualify. So I would just say, okay, well, for example, if you're looking to look for an FHA loan, you don't have to tell me your credit score, but if you're above a 580, I think you have a good chance at actually qualifying. So have this conversation with the lender. And if you're like, oh no, I'm at a 400 or whatever, I had a bad pass, I totaled the car, I owe money on such and such. That is not the end of it. Some people see that and they actually get discouraged on that. But, buying a home is a beautiful thing. It's a process. And just because you're not ready when you get the idea or the inspiration to do so, shouldn't halt you. And I actually experience that sometime where I have these conversations with a client and they get discouraged, and I completely understand it, because, they want to be ready. They want to take that leap in life. But sometimes we have to prepare. So when it comes to, your credit score being too low, then you want to work on the credit. And so there's different ways that you can do that. I always say, talk to a lender regardless, because what they can do is they can look at your profile, right? They have the ins and outs. They can see it. They can talk to you about it, and they can say, look, this is where we are now. This is where you want to be. Here's a credit plan on, how to get to there. So, 6 months from now, you can be eligible. So They'll tell you, and they'll structure it out. Some people just say, well, I have to pay off all these credit cards and this student loan, and they just don't see it. But when you allow a professional to break it down for you, and you tell them what your needs are and they help you out, they'll break it down. They'll say, you need to pay $22 on this American Express by this time of the month. You need to pay such and such like this. They will break it down for you and give you a plan in your face. And then, once if you stick to that plan, you will qualify in due time.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the things that people are missing sometimes. Like, they might just get put down, like when it comes to either the credit information or let's say they get pre-approved for 150. My whole job, as far as like since I've been adulting, since we're using that word, is to it's to literally tell my friends, is like, if you get pre-approved for 150, and we'll go into like pre-approvals and things like that, but if you get pre-approved for like 150, and look at the apartment that you're living in. It's usually if it's a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, it's usually 150 is usually going to be the price point. And if you're paying, a management system $1,200 a month, if you think about it, that 150, your rent, if you're looking at it from a rent perspective and a mortgage perspective, your numbers will not change. So your lifestyle would not change. You would just have ownership of your house while building, some type of equity. And, one thing I always like to tell people, we live in a growing city. Atlanta, we're always seeing that, the little adage that Atlanta is full, people need to stop moving here. But it's truly a blessing, because the only thing that's going up is going to be, your housing market within Atlanta. So, if you buy a home, or a condo or a one bedroom. And when I speak about home, it doesn't always have to be, especially for people who are by themselves, or they don't have a large family and things like that. I'm specifically talking about how much money is coming out of your pockets for rent every month versus what you could save on actually getting a mortgage, and things like that. So let's say you get pre-approved, you're pre-approved for 150. I'm young, I have one kid, or I don't have any kids. I live by myself, and I'm looking for a one bedroom condo, which is equivalent to the one bedroom apartment that I'm staying in right now, or a two bedroom. Where do I go from there after getting that pre-approval letter from my lender?
Okay, so there is a few factors that go into that. As far as we're assuming that you got approved for 150. That's your budget.
Okay.
It depends. First, it depends where you want to be, because you may or may not be familiar with this, or our audiences may not be familiar with it. But depending on location, that's why they say in real estate, location, location, location. Like, location is it. Okay. So what 150 might get you in one location, it might not get you the same thing in another location. What 150 will get me in Rockmart, Georgia, will not get me the same as in the heart of Atlanta, because it's just the way that, the market is structured, and the demand, and, the popularity, etc. So that's definitely something that we have to keep in mind is, okay, where are you looking? Because if you do want to be closer to the city, unfortunately, that 150 is not going to stretch very far. You might be able to get in on something that's going to need some work.
Absolutely.
So, you might need a whole renovation loan for that or something, and that's a conversation for another day. But, first we'll talk about areas, and the popularity and demand of areas. How flexible are you on that? I know you want to be close to the city, but would you be okay with something like Lithia Springs side, something like that? And then we also have to take into consideration is the type of market that we're in. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, the market was in a little bit of a different place. It wasn't so much a seller's market, and the demand wasn't as high, so you got more for your money. Absolutely. So, you might be able to sell a 150 home. Not even 5 years ago, 1 year ago, I sold a house that was 155, and it did need a little bit of TLC, but not too much. It was move-in ready. Like, you could move in. Yeah, you might have to replace the carpet next year or something like that, or you might want to go ahead and go to Home Depot and paint the walls, but it was move-in ready. Not so much today. It depends, because right now the way the market is going is so inflated that 150, you're going to have to put in a little bit of work in it, and you may not, people expect to walk in and see it look pristine, like when you first move into a new apartment or something, and that might not be the case. You might have holes in the walls from the previous owners, the fence might be tore up, it might need a little bit of landscaping, you might even need a new roof. And that's just things that have to be taken into consideration as well, is the structure of the market.
And also, like, I know for me, and just using like personal examples and things like that, let's say Buckhead, I'll always use the example of like Buckhead, Roswell Road, right? Like, there's Roswell Road is probably about a 10 to 15 minute drive into the city from to Buckhead, right? And your price going from that particular area to here within a 15-minute drive could change tremendously. But I always like to say, like, look at your own finance, and within reason, a $150,000 condo or a townhome versus a $200,000, given an HOA fee, could be the same mortgage, right? If you think about it, because some condos HOA fees, could get spiked out based on the location and things like that you live.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes.
And then
the amenities,
get more for your money in that point. So it's always, look at the location. It, like, let's say if you have 150 and you want to live in the heart of the city, right? I always use New York as an example when it comes to, just looking at different things from different angles. like
Yeah.
the space matters to some people, right? But space and location
Yeah.
sometimes doesn't go hand in hand, or it goes
Right.
hand in hand depending on how you look at it. So that's one
Yeah.
thing that you always have to take into consideration as well is, how can I put myself in the best realistic situation in accomplishing my goal, and not
Yeah.
necessarily saying, well, I have to wait till I get to this point before I can own something versus
Yeah.
together. If let's say you work further away from where you are now and you want to get closer, and location is the main thing to you. You might have to
Hmm.
give away that 1 bedroom, 1,000 square feet, and settle for 700, because listen, 700 square feet and 5 minute, 10 minute drive to work is going to be a lot different than an hour. So, those are always adage and stuff like that that you can discuss with your real estate professional. I would say always, be open with your agent, because
Oh yeah.
like you said earlier, this is the largest purchase most people are going to make, in a lifetime, really. And being
Mhm.
open with the person who's looking for you can always give you better direction, because you have the
Right.
portfolio, you have the wherewithal of where to look and where to go. And things
Right.
like that. So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say you're absolutely right. I mean, our job is to help you find what you need. But we can't do that if, you're not being, sometimes people are shy or, just don't really want to go into details on that. And so that's something that I kind of like to establish with my clients is let's have an open communication. If it's a couple, if it's a group, let's do a group chat. Let's talk about it together. If I send over a property, tell me what you like. I always say this. I say, let me send you an email with a few that I find. Tell me your pros and your cons. What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? What's in the middle, And I always have that conversation because I really want to get to know my clients so I can better serve you. And then as well as how you said, you might want to negotiate on your square footage if you're trying to get to a smaller work commute. And that's another thing that you're never going to find the perfect house. And that I think that's one of those myths that I like to bust is you're never going to find a house that has every single factor that you're looking for. It's always going to be a give and take because that's just what it is. I mean, the only way I think you get everything you want is probably a new construction that you design yourself, which is also an option. But that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and I brought this up in a conversation I was having with one of my friends, and he's looking for a house, and he's buying a home until him and his wife find their forever house. And I thought that was a great point that he made. Your first home doesn't have to be your forever home. It could be a stepping stone, however, to your forever home that you necessarily wouldn't get if you're still renting a home. So, I always want to put that information out there. There's, different things that you can do with 1 or 2 bedroom condos. And I like to focus a lot on that because I feel like, people rent 1 to 2 bedroom homes, especially, people around our age and things like that,
Yeah.
a lot more than they're renting a 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom home and things like that. So I always say there's a lot of things, there's, Airbnbs. I know the market is a little different now. Check in with your HOA if that's able to be rented out and things. There's different ways that you can make money off a property, even if you don't plan on being there forever. And the buy and sell process is not as difficult as people think, because just like you're looking for a property, someone else is going to be looking down the line. And, homes is one of the things that, it's a necessity of life, right? We're always going to need to live somewhere. So if you look at it in that regard, it's easy to get that point across and things like that. All right. So let's say you find your home that you're looking for. Talk to me about the exciting process of underwriting and how everything kind of goes together once you find that home. You're like, hey, Jay, this is what I'm looking for. Can we put this under contract? What is your negotiating points that some buyers may not know they have? Like for me, whenever I'm buying a home, like closing costs is something that I never want to pay. And I will always want to get some type of negotiation from the seller on, Can you pay half? Can you pay full? Something on the line. So what rights or what mode of execution do buyers have when they're going into those contracts? Because it's not
That's
like
a
you see a house for 160 and you're like, okay, they told me this is all I have, so can we please put it on for 160? How can I negotiate?
That's a great question. Negotiation is like you said, one of the most exciting and fun parts of my job. I love it, especially when you're good at it. It could be really riveting. But so again, I do have to put that out there that it depends on what kind of market we're in, right? So depending on the nature of the market will determine how much power you have. We always will negotiate regardless. I'm always going to negotiate on my clients' behalf and on what their interests and their needs are. But for example, like you said, closing costs. A lot of people aren't aware that you can ask the seller to cover closing. Like you said, well, let's go half and half, things like that. Right now, I know we're in a crazy seller's market. I mean, it's very, very low inventory. It is September 21st. September 21st?
Yep.
Yeah, September 21st.
Hard to believe we're already in September, by the way.
It's about to be October. I'm like, what happened? That's the pandemic. We'll just blame it on the pandemic. Right now, this market is insane. There's very, very low inventory. So that means that there are more buyers than there are sellers. And so every time a house actually drops on the market, it's like vultures on it. Just how me and my client are out looking, there's 5,000 other clients agents in the city working with their clients to find them a house too. And it's funny because that 150, 160 to maybe 280 is a sweet spot. That is where the majority of the consumers out there fall under, and so that creates even more congestion when it comes to looking at properties. So because of the nature of the market right now, for example, the buyer may not have as much leverage as asking for closing costs to be covered. And like you said, I don't want to pay closing costs. A lot of people don't want to come out of pocket to pay closing costs, because that's another thing that people may or may not know. Closing costs they're due at the table. So that's something that will be out of pocket. It's not something that you can roll into the loan. But for example, something that we can use as a negotiating tool, let's say I have a client that he's like, I have enough cash saved for my down payment and that's it. I don't have anything else. I can't afford to pay this, but I want to buy a house right now. Okay, then what we can do is, if you're okay with that, what we can do is we'll ask, when we negotiate, we submit the offer, we'll ask for them to cover. If they counter us back and they say, we don't want to pay closing costs, or we'll pay 1,000 of the 6,000, for example, okay, well, this is what we can do to get them to pay. We can tack on to the sales price. So let's say they're asking for 175, you're pre-approved at 200, we need 6,000 in closing. Let's add the 6,000 to the purchase price so the seller can see, oh, hey, I'm netting the same thing. Let me go ahead and pay this person's out-of-pocket costs. And when you think about it and you do the math, let's say you're doing a 30-year mortgage, which is what most people do, that extra $5,000-$6,000 isn't really going to hurt you in a lot. Well, it's not going to really affect you like that, because really, if you do the math, it's about $5 to $10 extra for every $1,000 on a loan. Absolutely. So when you look at it, you might say, hey, that sounds like a plan.
Yeah, and for most people, getting $6,000 out of your pocket initially versus paying $50 more on your mortgage or $30 more on your mortgage, if you look at it from just a cash flow standpoint, that could save you a lot of money. And that's a negotiating tool that a lot of people, outside of doing real estate contracts, they don't know they have the option to have. So they're looking at home buying from a standpoint of, I have to pay my down payment and closing costs. They're telling me it's $20,000 out of my pocket and things like that. Mm-hmm. When I bought my first home, just to use a personal example, I was fresh out of college, so I didn't have any credit established, and I was looking for one bedroom in Buckhead area. Ended up being 104, and I had it was an FHA approved condo. And I only had to pay $3,500 down payment, and my buyer paid for the whole closing costs. I had a buyer who was going to Florida. She had bought the house, or the condo, maybe about 10 years prior, was probably making about $30,000-$40,000 off the sale. So she could eat about 4 grand, 5 grand in closing costs. And it actually, ended up saving me a lot of money. I didn't have to put down the large down payment that I thought in my head. And I was able to move into a condo, a lot faster and pay the same money as if I was renting, or even less
Yeah.
in the area. So it's one of those things where, if you talk to your realtor, they can give you that information. And like you said earlier, sharing that information, like, hey, this is what I have. This money is
Yeah.
coming out of a magical place. This is what I have to buy a
Yeah.
home. Can we make this work? And it's all about fitting the scope for what you need and how to make that work. So I definitely believe that having that relationship with your realtor is very, very important to have. And I always encourage people. It's always difficult talking about personal finances, but you know it's business, and it's not just mental. It's
Yeah.
more so like, hey, this is what I need. It's a large commitment in buying a home, so it's always something
Yeah.
that you want to make sure that you have enough information from you.
Real quick, I would like to touch on what you said about, it's very important to have those conversations with your real estate agent. And like you said, it's not personal. But that's why I always recommend for individuals to work with agents who they trust. Agents that, you can just hear it in their voice that they care. An agent that's honest with you, open. Even if your agent tells you something you may not want to hear, but they're being real with you, appreciate that. Because agents are like anything else in the professional world, lawyers, baseball players, whatever. There's people who love their job, know what they're doing, and care. And then there's people that don't, that are just in it for, the money or the come up or whatever. And so that's why it's really important to work with someone who you trust and who you know is going to do right by you. And then you're able to more comfortably have that conversation and mesh with them and just be real. And like you said, it's business at the end of the day. I'm not judging you by what you have in your bank account or anything like that. It's really more about, this is what it is. This is what you have. What can we do? Let's work together to help finesse the best situation and outcome for you and what you want.
Absolutely. Okay. So house goes under contract. What does that process look like for me, the buyer? What do I have to do once the house goes on contract?
Okay, so there's a plethora of things. On the lending side, which I can't speak too much for them, but on the lending side, I know that they'll probably be in the process of, maybe verifying your employment, which is the underwriting part of the loan. They'll have people reaching out to your past employers and, just making sure that all of the documents that you submitted for your pre-approval are legit and everything's good. So that might be something that you as the buyer will have to do, is probably handle a few paperwork and stuff on the lending side. As far as on the actual real estate transaction side with us, first things first, the house goes under contract. The first thing you want to do is get an inspection. And that's just something that I think isn't negotiable. It is negotiable. If you don't feel like doing it, you absolutely have the right not to.
Yeah.
But the smart buyer is going to get one. They range usually between $350 to $400, depending on who you go to and depending on the size of the house. But yeah, definitely you want to get an inspection. This will be during your due diligence period. Due diligence is a period that usually lasts within 7 to 10 days. Again, everything is negotiable, so it can be 0, it can be 50, it just depends. But during your due diligence time, where you are protected that you can walk away, you want to get an inspection done. You hire an inspector who's good at what he does. You get the report back. You and your agent will sit down. We'll go over, here are the top 5 most important things that we need to address about this home. And something that I actually wanted to say too, as far as new construction, a lot of people don't even think about, even on a new build property, something that's brand spanking new and you're the first person living in it, you're going to want to get an inspection as well.
Yeah.
Because builders make mistakes too.
Absolutely.
Builders make mistakes, and a lot of builders actually cut corners, unfortunately. And so you want to make sure that they're doing everything up to code, and that when you get into that house and the deal is done, that you're ready to go and you know what you're working with, as far as interior, exterior, roof, crawl space. Oh my God, you name it. You want to have a professional out there looking. So once we get that inspection back, we'll sit down. We'll say these are the 5 top things that we need to get addressed. If it's something small like a light switch or a light fixture, you're like, oh, my dad can do that, or I can do that at Home Depot. Let's not worry about that. But I really want to tackle this water heater problem. The water heater is 10 years. No, let's say the water heater is 20 years old, which I have seen. And it's working now, but it's not as efficient as it could be. What can we do about that? Can we get the seller to replace it? And basically we'll negotiate, and it's called an amendment to address concerns in the GAR forms. And so basically we'll just negotiate any repairs that will need to be done. This can either be the seller agrees to fix them, or the seller will agree to give you a credit towards fixing them. So that means that they just give you the money and you go and fix it on your own time with your own people. Or seller can actually drop the price to reflect those repairs. So then once we do the inspection, then during that under contract phase, you will pay for the appraisal. That's also part of the lending side. You'll have the appraisal paid for and done. And what that does, they send out an independent third party to come out and look at the house and basically make sure that it's worth what you're agreeing to pay for.
Absolutely.
And
let's go over like fees so far that you would have to pay for. Initially, I know there's not a lot of talk sometimes about earnest money. I know you have, number one, when you're committed to buying a house, the process and things like that, you and the seller have to commit to some sort of earnest money.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but as a buyer, all that is a trust between seller and buyer.
Yes.
Like, hey, I'm committed to buying this house, because remember, the seller too has money to make off their property, right? They're not just going to hold off every single buyer for you.
Exactly.
Just say like, hey, I think I like your house. So some type of commitment that also goes to the end of your loan. So it's not money that just gets lost in translation, or money that goes to the realtor. There's a lot of times, and I would think personally too, when I bought my first house and I had to pay $1,000 earnest money, and I was like, wait, what? Where's this money going? And until I saw my HUD statement at the end that it was going to be attached on the loan, I had my realtor didn't explain that portion to me with the that whole entire sentiment of it's a commitment between the seller and the buyer and things like that. So earnest money, of course, down payment that you're going to know about and what your down payment is, closing costs, and you just mentioned appraisal and inspection. Those are two different things.
Yes. So with the earnest money, I'm so happy that you touched on that. That is typically 1% of the purchase price. Okay. That also can fluctuate depending on whatever. But like you said, it's a good faith deposit is what it's known as. And it's just letting the buyer know, like you said, look, I'm serious. I'm putting this money down. And so what that does is it reassures the seller that not only are you serious, but if for whatever reason, due diligence is over and you decide to walk away for no reason. You decide to walk away because the house came up for sale across the street and you rather have that one. So at this point, you've wasted the seller's time, money that he could have been making. He could have already sold the property. Like you said, the seller is, when a house is under contract, he or she can legally not accept any other contract. This is your house. It is now bound under legal circumstances to be yours. Obviously there's a process, so it's not yours yet till you sign for it, but it's almost like reserve. So your earnest money is going to that reserve. If you close on the property, that money, like you said, goes towards your down payment. So if your down payment was $10,000 and you pay $2,000 in earnest money, you now only have to bring $8,000 to the closing table. If you decide that you want to leave, rescind the contract, step away from the property, you no longer want to purchase it, but you do so under legal circumstance, like during due diligence, or, you guys can't agree on inspection, repairs, or anything that's legitimately stated in the contract and you leave for a legitimate reason, your earnest money is protected as well, and it will go back in your pocket.
Absolutely. So I know when it comes to real estate, there's a plethora of information that we could cover, and we can literally be on this call all day.
That's
But in
right.
the interest of time and things like that, I just wanted to give our viewers, a short overview of the direct process in purchasing a home. So let's say you go through all the steps, closing day. So a lot of times, again, like a myth and things like that. And you do have to get an attorney and everything like that. But the process is not as strenuous as it's made out to be. Like, you don't have to go for an attorney. As long as you have a realtor to handle your back office. One of the reasons why it's so important to have a real estate agent, if you're not so privy to as much information about house buying, and which, if you're not a professional, you won't be. So don't take it as a slight on your intelligence. It's just more so, people have jobs to do. So
Right.
when it comes to the closing, how do you kind of set that up for your final? That's when the champagne bottle enter the table and things like that, and paperwork gets signed. It is for my buyers. Practice your signature, because you're going to need it that day, because there's a lot of paperwork that you have to sign. But it's all within scope of protecting your interests, as well as, really is more so about protecting you, that you're signing those paperwork as well as your lender and things like that. But talk to me a little bit about closing day. I know you get excited for closing day, but how does that?
Ooh. That's everybody's favorite day in the transaction. All parties are smiling and happy on that day. So closing day, the way it works is, typically a contract will last 30 days, right? Typically. So let's say we go under contract October 1st, we will be closing October 31st. And so that is the agent's job, where we will coordinate with the listing agent, of course, seller and buyer as well. We'll coordinate with all of our schedules. We typically have attorneys, real estate attorney offices that we always work with. We'll check on their availability and we'll just schedule it as so, and then we'll all show up.
Yep. And the process is seamless. You come in, you have, your water's on the table, your paperwork, you sign all your paperwork. And then another thing, those are still, that last day of closing is always, you're not done with the deal, because there's different things in there, in those lines. And I always say to buyers, you never stop negotiating until that deal is done. There's things that you might go over that statement, and there's something that might be there that you may have not requested. For example, I had a seller who paid 2 months of their HOA, and I'm not a real estate person. I was just buying my house, and they paid 2 months. 2 months of their HOA up front, because they thought they needed more time to sell their house. However, as a buyer, it's not necessarily my problem when it comes to how long it takes for you to sell your house versus how long or what my HOA fees. And their stance was, you need to pay those 2 months of my HOA because we've already paid for it. Those are things during the contract and things like that. You want to go over every single line to make sure that in that very late stage of closing, that is not like a negotiation point. That's when, you've already had your marks and everything like that on the table, just so, all parties can just be agreeable, and that day could truly be, a seamless day. Another thing that I know that that never gets really talked about, when you're moving from that stage of renting to buying, your mortgage is not due till 2 months later. And a lot of times, two people, that's a way of just getting that deposit that you just paid. You're getting at least half of that back in your pocket, because sometimes you won't have to pay your first month rent because everything has to go through and things like that. So you're in the house for a month. You don't have to pay that first month, and your mortgage actually starts on the next month. So without realizing, you're skipping rent, right?
It skips. Yeah, it does vary from loan to loan, and it depends on when you close. So I would definitely double check with your lender, but you're right. nine times out of 10 from what I've been seeing, you skip a month. So if you close end of July, your first payment won't be until September. And that really comes into clutch for a lot of people because, that money that you save, that could be some new furniture that can help you relocate.
Absolutely. Okay. So once again, like I said, I appreciate you, Jay. I wanted to touch on a few other things like the market and COVID and things like that. But, there's transactions still going on. The real estate market is livelier than ever.
It's booming.
Don't let misconception fool you that the world is not moving. So I appreciate you taking the time to just educate my viewers. Maybe we'll do a segment later on just different things that we can find out about real estate and things like that. One question that I want to ask you before I let you go, kind of like a little game. Would you say you sell more townhomes and condos than single family homes?
No. That's just me. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own niche, their niche market. Some people are more branded towards that. I work with a lot of families and a lot of couples who are starting their families and they want that extra, they like that single family residence. But I do work with townhomes. I have sold townhomes and condos before. I just mostly do single family residences.
Absolutely. And do you, let's say your clients come in and they want specific, I would say I'm someone who's always and all my realtors, they know, I just want what I want, but a professional opinion is always going to be better than mine, right? Because I truly respect you guys and what you do as far as your craft and things like that. So would you say you're a realtor that paints the whole scope, or do you just, what the client wants is what the client needs and you kind of follow their direction? So what type of realtor would you say you fit in?
I'm the type of realtor that I take my clients' needs very seriously. I like to listen to my client. I want to learn about you. I want to learn about what you're looking for and why, so I can better understand you, so I can provide you what you need. But I'm also the type of real estate agent that's going to be honest with you and set realistic expectations, because I feel that if I'm transparent from the beginning and I set your expectations realistically, not only will we create more bond, a trust bond there more because we respect each other for the transparency, but you're also not going to be let down. It's not going to be an emotional roller coaster because I've told you from the beginning, this and this and this may come up, or this and this and this may occur with what you're looking for in this area, or whatever, the situation is. So I definitely would say I listen to my clients' needs, and I always do what I can to provide that and look for that, but I'm always going to set the standard realistically as well.
Okay, absolutely. And then lastly, where can my viewers or our viewers, where can they find you and how can they get in contact with you?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Sam, for having me. It was a pleasure being here. I would love to do a second segment. And the viewers can find me on Instagram at J Diaz Real Estate. So it's JAYDIAZ Real Estate. And I'm also on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe. I actually do a lot of info 411 real estate videos for first-time home buyers.
Love your channel, by the way. I think it's informational. Definitely.
Thank you. And that is also J Diaz Real Estate on Facebook. You can find me at J Diaz in the Atlanta area. So yes, thank you so much.
All right, perfect. Well, I appreciate you taking some time, and we'll look forward to talking again. And that's Sam and Jay, and you guys have a good day.